Welcome to the Passive House podcast, brought to you by Passive House Accelerator, a catalyst for zero carbon building. For news, inspiration, and connections from all flavours of Passive House, check out passivehouseaccelerator.com. Sign up to receive regular updates about events, get your questions answered, and contribute to the community dialogue. There's loads of free information for experienced professionals and people just starting out on their Passive House journey. We hope to see you at one of our weekly Passive House Accelerator live webinars. In the meantime, here's this week's Passive House podcast. Welcome back to the Passive House podcast. I'm Matthew Cutler-Welsh, coming to you from Tamaki Makaurau, Auckland in New Zealand. And this week we've got Zach. Zach, how you doing?
I'm great. How are you?
Good. And we are joined by Ilka. Great to have you back on the podcast, Ilka. You've been, of course, doing a few bonus episodes from your trip to Innsbruck. Good to be back.
Yeah, I'm back in Philadelphia. Feels good.
Nice.
Well, it was really nice in Innsbruck too.
Yeah. Well, we've had a bit of a chat to that about that, and it's great hearing some of those bonus episodes as well with some of the action that you and Mary caught up with over there, which is fantastic. But we are here today to talk about prefab, which is something that you are involved in, Ilka, but brought together some pretty incredible women with some pretty amazing and inspiring thoughts about that. So we're going to get into that. But before we do, Zach, do you want to give a shout out to our supporters?
Absolutely. So a big thank you to our stakeholder partner, NYSERDA, the New York State Energy Research and Development Authority. Thank you, too, to our founding sponsors, 475 High Performance Building Supply, Glavel, Ingui Architecture, Minutair, Partel, Rockwell North America, Stoke Corp, and Zola Windows. And thank you, too, to our champion sponsors, Bewizo, Gradient, Icon Windows and Doors, Intelligent Membranes, PH Air Seal, Proseco, and Source 2050. Thank you, sponsors.
Thank you very much. All right. Ilka, who are we listening to today?
So we got together with Beth Campbell, Edie Dillman, and Katie Faulkner. And I've known those three for a while now. I think I met Katie a long time ago at a conference, and then Edie and Beth actually through the accelerator. And we've really become friends by now, and we have these really cool and interesting conversations once in a while. And I thought it would be great to just record one of them.
And this is the first of a prefab series that we're doing on the podcast over the next, the course of the next month. We'll be highlighting prefab here. And also we'll be producing and presenting the Reimagine Buildings Prefab Conference on May 17th. So this is an online conference that everyone should definitely take in. We're super excited about it. Registration is open for it now, so you can check out all of that information on our homepage at passivehouseaccelerator.com.
Awesome. All right. Well, let's get stuck in and listen into this great conversation with Edie, Beth, Katie, and yourself, Ilka.
Welcome to the podcast, Edie, Beth, and Katie. I'm really excited to have you all here and record one of the conversations that we've been having over the last few years, really. So we are all prefab believers. We've actually all built businesses or careers around prefab. We were pretty much all early adopters. We've been presenting together about prefab, and we've become really good friends. Mm-hmm. So it's really great to have these conversations, whether it's in preparation of presentations or if it's just checking in how everyone's doing. But what's great is that we all look at prefab from different angles, and that we can really share our experiences from different perspectives. So what I would like to talk about first is the amazing work that you guys do, and also what personally drew everyone to prefabrication. So, Edie, why don't you start?
Hi, Elka. Hi, everybody. Fun to share this conversation. So I'm here as a friend to the accelerator, of course, but representing my company, Be Public Prefab. And we're a company that launched 5 years ago, really with the drive to offer passive house performance widely in a panelized system. So we're working on building envelopes and enabling people to design and build more quickly to what we think is, the only way to build. So great to see you guys. All right, Katie.
Oh, it's me. Oh, hi. I'm Katie Faulkner. I am also here as a friend to the accelerator and have been really enjoying getting to know this group. I am an architect by training and drawn to prefab pretty early, actually, from the time I was a student. I had worked some construction. I'd always been really interested in those architects who had these kind of model homes as a means to kind of industrialize the production of architecture. I always felt like that somehow was going to help make it more affordable and accessible to everybody. Sort of fast forward 30 years, and I can't say that I've achieved that in every way. I have two different ways that I get to dip my toe into prefab. One is I have a firm called Westwork. We have not yet achieved a project in prefab. We look at them all the time. We propose them. We tend to do a lot of low-income housing and transitional housing, so we're very focused on the price point of construction. But then I also started a R&D company called HP Tech with a couple of other guys, longtime friends, Evan Smith and Christian Borger, and we are looking at fabricating exterior envelope prefab for deep energy retrofits and really trying to improve the performance of existing buildings. We have been working on that for about 3 years. We are grant funded and are starting to put these up on the first buildings, the first test case in the next 6 months. So stay tuned for that. But I'm hopeful that that is sort of a way that prefab can begin to impact renovation and adaptive reuse. And with that, I will pass it back to you, Beth.
Thanks, Katie. And for those of you who have not checked out Highland Park Technologies, what Katie was just talking about, it's super cool, very innovative. And I'm a fan of the accelerator and what everybody else is doing in your personal careers. So I came into construction through the build side of things. I started off in construction just over 20 years ago with bags on in the field. And I've mostly been working as a PM for high performance residential single family home construction companies, design build type companies, and got into offsite a few years ago when I was working here in the Northeast for Bensonwood and Unity Homes. I'm now working for a software startup that is leveraging high performance in offsite construction. So I have a different angle than I think many of you. But one of the cool benefits of that has been doing a lot of industry interviews with folks all across the offsite fabrication world to really understand where are the sticking points and the hurdles, the successes that are making offsite construction possible here in North America. I also teach the FIAS certified builders training, and I sit on the board of Passive House Rhode Island, which is a newly formed FIAS Alliance membership organization here. So over to you, Ilka. You need to introduce yourself, I think.
Sure. So I'm Ilka Cassidy. I am the co-host of the Passive House Accelerator podcast, but I am also the co-founder of Holzbaum System together with Steve Hessler and David Hessler. And what we do is we are basically the translators and connectors between the architect and the builder, the design intent, and then what is getting fabricated by the manufacturer. And that all happens through the lens of passive house detailing and by using a virtual model of the building. So we're basically, we call it sometimes virtual framers. And we are building a digital twin of the building. So I came to prefab from the architecture side after I was already a CPHC. And both being a passive house consultant and prefab gave me the chance to be fully integrated into projects again. Because what I experienced was that after or while having three daughters, it was very challenging for me to stay in projects because I just couldn't always be on call for meetings that had to happen on site right then and there. They needed answers to move forward with the project. And sometimes that was really hard to accommodate. So I felt like I continuously lost control over my projects. So transitioning into consultant position and then into prefab really allowed me to take a lot of the control back and make the construction process a lot more predictable and plannable. So, of course, there are all the other benefits of prefab that, of course, I was drawn to. But on a personal level, I do believe that planning the project in the computer first is a huge benefit, of course. And but particular for women or others who might not be able to or aren't as comfortable going on construction sites all the time. So yeah, that's just a little bit of a personal background. But what I would like to talk about next, though, is that we all see this huge potential in prefab, and it's been named as the future solution of construction's inefficiencies. And we do see a lot of really big milestones that have been accomplished and great work that a lot of firms are doing all over the country or all over the world. But the promise of really taking over the construction market or the construction sector hasn't really happened yet. So what are we thinking? Why is that?
What do you mean, Ilka? Everything's working beautifully as every project goes perfectly. I don't know what you mean. And I tend to be a glass half full when we talk about this. So, I feel like there is adoption. I do think there is movement and a lot of positive movement. I think, I spend a lot of time on the business end of things and talking to other industry leaders. And, we've got a lot of very high profile failures in sort of offsite. But then I see these small and mid-size, sort of more locally based systems and programs being very successful. So I think expectations of how big this market and the potential, I think it's hard. Like we're working in a space where we all know there's such a huge need to build faster and better. And we're anxious for the promise of prefab to be like here today. I do think it's here today, but it's just at the beginning. Like we're really at that early adopters, sort of innovators stage, which is why I think the folks in passive house who tend to be early adopters, who tend to be innovators, are having more success in prefab because we're asking for better. We are detailing meticulously. Whereas I think when we look at the larger market of like offsite or modular construction, it has been sort of industrialized and it has really been focused more on code or what some of us call barely legal construction. So just spinning it that I think there are successes. It is small when we talk about the whole of construction. But I do think there are good things happening, and I think people are learning as we go. I certainly think this year feels very different than last year, even in people's awareness of what offsite is and how builders are thinking about it and looking for solutions in a way that it's not ambulance chasing of, wood prices during COVID. It really is around, okay, it's time. Let's get to work.
Edie, I think you bring up a really good point, kind of drawing our attention to how offsite has really become a major part of high performance construction, because it is so much easier to deliver on high performance metrics with offsite than it is with site built construction. It's easier to deliver an airtight envelope. It's easier to pay attention and do all the important QC around thermal bridging and just project detailing when you're in a controlled environment, like in some type of offsite facility. And what I'm seeing in the folks that I'm speaking with are that people want to build better than code, but they have a hard time understanding what are the cost implications of that, how they're going to do it, how, if they're the GC, how they're possibly going to get their trades on board, or how they're going to, have the resources available to really be there on site every day watching and micromanaging. And what I've seen with offsite is it allows people who are delivering a high performance home to be able to then focus on all the rest of the elements that it requires to deliver a good quality building, not just the envelope and not just the air sealing. And so I think that, yeah, you make a really good point that we're going to see offsite construction really continue to gain more and more of a foothold in high performance construction and in passive house construction, especially as codes tighten up around the United States and more builders are required to build to higher standards. It's going to be a great avenue for them to be able to slip in and then focus on what they do best, which is delivering a home at a certain price point, or focusing on the finishes, things like that. If the envelope is already not exactly guaranteed, but delivered in such a way that you can just run with it.
Yeah, and I might direct this to Ilka just as a follow-up to that is, part of the premise of prefab is risk reduction for builders.
Yeah.
And, I think that's when we win the hearts and minds, that we're raising their quality and their ability to perform, but it's also reducing their risk. And that, I'm not sure if we're there yet. I mean, I think that's the piece where builders who have been open to innovation have been at the forefront, and they have, jumped in and helped basically R&D the industry for the last 10 years. But have they really been able to cash in on that promise of risk reduction? Because I do feel like builders, hold so much liability, and it shouldn't just be the airtightness. It shouldn't just be the thermal bridging and the structure. It really should be a weight off their shoulders that materials are not being wasted, that their crews are safe. And Ilka, are you feeling that in the field?
Yeah, so what's really interesting about what you're saying is that what we do, which is basically building the building in computer first, right? It's that digital twin, or we call it a single integrated manufacturing model. We do see a huge benefit for the builder because of that whole risk reduction. But what's interesting is that mostly we've been getting hired by the architect, or the architects approach us to do this. They decide that they want to do a panelized project, and then they like our support, and then we basically get into the project through the architects. And we always wondered why that is, because the bigger risk is actually on the builder. So I guess maybe it's still seen as an additional cost, which is, something it's hard to quantify. Change orders, right? Change orders never really make it into the budget, but the person that helps to avoid them does, right? People like us, we do need to get paid for the work we do, but it's not really seen as something that, it's not really seen as adding value to the project. It's mostly seen as adding cost. So, which is actually not huge, because we're basically doing what every pre-manufactured process has to do, which is building everything in the computer and make it fabricatable, basically. So yeah, I mean, I think on our side, our goal is actually to reach more of the builders. So what we want to do, moving forward, in order to scale up prefabrication, is really addressing that integration of the builder, of the architect, into the whole process, and really teaching everyone, how do we streamline this process, and how do we communicate better, how do we set expectations better for each other, so that the whole process becomes a lot smoother than it is right now. Because for me, that is definitely a little bit of maybe not a hurdle, but it's for me, what's not quite there is really having an integrated process where it just goes very, very smoothly and quickly. There's always expectations that are different on either side, and there's always yes, somehow the process has to be integrated in each other's workflow. It can't be too much additional work or time or cost. And that's what we're trying to change. Katie, how about you?
I agree with what you're saying. I think that I share Edie's hope for prefab, but I confess I do lose my patience with it a little bit, in that I find where there will likely be success, in my opinion, is component driven. I think that where I'm seeing people use it and with great success tends to be in the single family home market, or potentially in their sort of duplicative developments of singles, as opposed to large housing developments. I think as soon as we start to scale it up, it gets hard, for a number of reasons. That big building projects tend to be component driven and trade driven. I think when we get outside of timber type construction and we move down to steel or mixed, with concrete, there are other challenges in doing that. I have great hope for things like mass timber, where you're sort of beginning to order up components and they're flat pack delivered, et cetera. And again, you can sort of see things, how quick they go in and are assembled. However, as soon as you start to scale the thing up, as soon as you're trying to develop big pieces, you're fabricating, and thus you're building a factory, and you become somewhat hampered by logistics and scale. And I think that's where I have seen it frustratingly not be successful, because all by rights, I feel that it should. I think there are so many smart people who have so many good things to say. We have seen plenty of good examples of really well built and conceived prefab, but it is incredibly hard to deliver it. It's hard to deliver it volumetrically. It's hard to ship them once you've built them. You get really stung by kind of shipping costs and logistics. So you kind of want to stay in your market. So I tend to be more hopeful on the pieces of the buildings rather than the whole buildings themselves. The process that you're working on in particular, Ilka, is where I feel like there's a great amount of hope, because I do think that the promise of BIM never really did what it said it would. When we all sort of looked at it back in the early 2000s, it was meant to be the thing that helped us align the trades during design, so the actual application of it and even potentially fabrication would go more smoothly. I would say that has yet to be realized. So I remain a fan, and I feel like I've devoted a fair amount of my career to it, but I do think that when I'm looking at these large scale projects and trying to solve the kind of bigger, hairier problems, I wish that I could see prefab scale up more quickly. But it does tend to be more expensive in some markets, depending on the construction type, depending on the level of customization. So, but I remain hopeful.
So what's really interesting about what you just said is you have components, and you see components being successful, but there needs to be something that coordinates all the components, right? That's something, it has to be made into a system. I think that's really, really important. And I think that's kind of what you're trying to do, Edie, right?
Yeah, and I was just sort of pondering what Katie was saying of, at what form factor and what scale do we sort of cross a threshold where we haven't really met that demand? What is sort of the sweet spot of where the industry is now, and sort of what portion of the build? I mean, we really only specialized in the structural envelope. There are a lot of people who are taking on other pieces. And I think, it's really hard. We're talking about evolving practice from architects to engineers to builders, and even, local inspectors. We're really tackling a lot. So I think, biting off sort of natural pieces that can be controlled and can help move the market without trying to revolutionize everything all at once across multiple markets. I feels like some of those big guys have taken on so much for good ambitions, for good reasons, but that it is a slow industry. It's a very hard ship to move. And so how we approach it is really important. And I think, Katie, you're working in retrofitting. I can't tell you how many times a week I get asked if we can produce panels for retrofits. I would love to jump into that space, but talk about complexity, and bespoke and one-off and detailing, and regions that have such high demand and also just totally different materials and typologies. I mean, I just think it's a lot. It makes me happy that I'm sort of stuck over here in new construction where things, really tidy, right? There's no mud on our sites. But I love thinking about, where the builders fall in this process and sort of the adoption loop for them, and what is attractive and of advantage. And Ilka, I love looking at your models. You know this. I love watching you present because I get like hypnotized by your BIM. But even the simplicity of truly creating a digital twin and using computer assisted design just for takeoffs. Like I can imagine as a builder looking at your BIM and going, great, can you do takeoffs for every, plumbing, fitting, every electrical outlet? Like that is a value to speed just the project management and ordering on sites. And for me, that scales very quickly, just like the purchasing and delivering and scheduling of materials in assisting builders. Certainly the architect has designed it, specified it, but being able to provide that kind of level of detail. And of course, I would raise the desire to have less waste on site, right? So that if you do control and purchase well from a digital twin, what does that do to push the industry?
I think that was the magic of Katerra, though. If one thing had survived, the fact that every building was delivered with a BOM, with a bill of materials, that was really fantastic. That the model had generally a pretty full BOM with it, that down to the fasteners. And that feels like a skill we should have. But I'll be honest with you that the people generating those models were aerospace engineers. They were not the architects. We were like, here, because
here's your spaceship. There you go.
But I always dreamt of being the one to be able to do it. But it's true. You're right. What a thing to be able to do.
Well, and we have surveyed our builders, and they're very interested in that. They really would like all of, the brackets and all the tapes delivered at install, that is worthwhile to them. That additional cost, and risk reduction again. And Beth, I'm going to kick it to you because this is right in line with what you're doing and what you're talking to people about.
Yeah, and I think one thing that we're circling around in this conversation right now is many of us who've been working in high performance construction have been doing single family bespoke custom homes. And, the fact is that somewhere around 95% of new single family construction happening in North America is through these major developers. It's through like tract housing, right? And so I think that, custom architecture will certainly always have a place, and whether or not that's site built or built in a factory, fantastic. And, I think this concept of custom projects, especially when we're talking about single family construction, my boyfriend often makes this analogy that no one today is going around saying, tailored clothing is a human right. Like we, sure, we have a lot of different product, clothing manufacturers
It's
out
not.
there, right? Like hand tailored clothing. No, we don't all need bespoke homes. We need good, high quality homes that are beautiful and healthy and resilient and energy efficient and all these other things, but they don't need to be original. And one of the major hurdles that we need to get past, I believe, in offsite manufacturing is that, when you're working in a factory, you're going to see most efficiencies through building a product, not a project. And therefore, a lot of these, like when we're talking about a bill of materials, we're talking about, efficiencies to the overall cost. We're going to see that scale the more that we can produce repeatable products, whether that is more at the component level, like a bathroom pod, or it's a whole home. No matter what, I think getting away from this idea of fully custom projects, while those again do have a place, but for the majority of us who just need a safe, healthy, resilient, beautiful, comfortable place to live, I don't need it to be unique. I would be more than happy if I had somebody in my region delivering a beautiful offsite, project that I could do on an infill lot here in Providence, Rhode Island, that could be cost affordable. I would jump at the chance. And we see that as an example in Sweden, that option is there. We see that in Japan. We haven't realized it here in North America yet. And that's where I'm gunning. I'm gunning for that possibility.
I think everyone completely agrees with that's the only way to reach efficiency and scale. What's interesting though is a lot of prefab manufacturers or house manufacturers, they actually have come out with like home lines or pre-designed homes. And as far as I can tell, they haven't really been that successful with those. Why is that?
I think we need a whole other podcast for that, Elka. I think it's interesting because, Beth and I have talked about this with Unity and, beautiful pre-designed homes. And we do collaborations, and we've got some collaboration, signature architect designed homes available through Be Public, as well as our own standard plans. And, everybody who's sort of touched on that and entered the market says, yeah, everything becomes customized. And so like to what level? It's so funny, Beth, I thought you were going to use the car analogy because, we always get stuck on the car analogy. Are you going to build a car in your front yard now? But I love this comparison to fashion or to clothing. So many of us in Passive House talk about a really good sweater on your house. Mm-hmm. And so when we think about, tract housing being fast fashion and really stuff that gets thrown away and lands in the trash heap versus a classic that has better materials, that is still fairly affordable, but will last for 15 seasons.
Yeah.
Versus something that is, a tailored in Italy suit for your boyfriend, right? There is a range in there. And I do think we're all seeking sort of that middle path of really high quality that can be adaptable and used in high end to workforce to affordable and basically disappear into the budget, right? That is the goal. But I think it's interesting that so many people, and I think it is an issue we have of perception just to the passive house world in general, that people think of it as more expensive and it has to be custom. And Accelerator and other people share stories over and over again of that not being the case, but we're still having that conversation.
I was just going to respond to Ilka's question, because Ilka, I agree. There are so many fabricators out there that have a set of designs that they would love to push. They would love to be able to produce those in repetition. And it seems to come down to price point. And that has been, I've conducted over 50 interviews with homeowners who are interested in offsite construction. And it seems like there is a price point where people will give up needing to customize, needing to tailor, their home exactly to what they want. There's some threshold there, but generally speaking, we haven't in North America. We've seen it in other countries, but in North America, we haven't seen the price come down to the point where people say, you know what, I'm okay without the dog wash station. I'm okay without the extra, thing that I wanted in this home. This is going to be fine. This suits my needs, and for this price point, I'm going to go for it. And I think that's a major differentiator.
I mean, this is probably either another podcast, or maybe you're just going to kick me right off the team. But I confess that I have always had a fundamental problem, maybe isn't the right word, questioning about everyone's God-given right to a single-family home. I mean, I think it's a little bit like, do we all get original fashion? I mean, one of the reasons why you also can't scale up passive house as easily as you might is that if every individual gets their own envelope and they don't have anybody to either side of them, in other words, we're not in a townhouse, or we haven't kind of collected our systems, or I'm not sure that we should be surprised. We're trying to build for durability. We're trying to build for higher performance than, as I think, Edie rightfully called, sort of just barely legal code. And I know that is trying to revolutionize a system that has long been entrenched, that people just have that in their mind, that they're going to, one's idea of having arrived, whatever that means, is usually that you have your own home. But again, if we all feel that we need the home and the yard, there just are only so many homes and yards. So if we're really serious about the performance, and we're really serious about the offsite production and the sort of ability to sort of repeat it, I have generally felt that the townhome, the dense development, even in a rural setting, is far preferable to the individual home, because you will not get out of that higher end market, because that is going to be further and further out of people's reach.
Amen.
Amen.
We're all clapping. It's a podcast and we're all like waving and clapping, but I think absolutely. And I think, when you look at housing starts and what's happening and what's being built, the country is moving towards rental and more townhome and higher density. I'm a true urbanist living in the West, and this is, for me, always painful. Why do we have to park cars? Why are we making space for cars and not parks at this point? But I think maybe obvious to the passive house community, but let's just say it, it's much easier and much more affordable to hit passive house in these larger shared units, right? Like that is one of the reasons that the debate around cost for passive house feels so stuck, because it is about the single family home. Because once we start into the multifamily, it really, like, you turn a corner. And that's where, comfort and sound isolation and all these things really matter, quality of life, but also affordability is just there. And whether it's, the benefit of lower energy costs is a benefit to the owner or the tenant, either way, it's good, right? It is a way to create affordability, because the carrying costs and operation costs, are diminished. So yes, Katie, totally agree.
Yeah, and I completely agree as well. But going back to prefab, so would we then say that prefab is more successful for those larger scale projects, or is it slow to be adopted as well?
I think it's slow, and I mystified at that. I think it's slower than it should be. Everybody can point to the Marriott in New York City that did it. I think there are projects that have done it, and I am sort of mystified by it. I think I know I've talked to you all about this before, but we do transitional housing for formerly homeless people. And in many cases, these projects are so similar to one another that I don't see how they couldn't be modularized. The size of the unit, the amenities of the unit, they're infinitely repeatable. But because they're at that price point market, they're not really who the folks at Factory OS have in mind when they're sort of fabricating. This is a little bit more like your podium group of sort of how cheap can I make it? But this to me seems like where prefab just should sing, because it is in that stick built construction. There is a lot of repetition. Things are unitized. The kitchen units, the bathroom units, the tub surrounds, they're repeatable. They're like hospitality in many ways. And I don't feel like the pressure is there for it to be unique to everyone, because people customize them when they get in there. They are fairly plain. But that's something that I'm not smart enough to know why it isn't taking off, but it feels to me where prefab and passive house meet at a price point that will be impactful. And is a problem that I have not yet been able to find examples of people that are successfully doing it, but I don't doubt that it's out there.
And Katie, what's interesting about that? I know you're there in Boston. I'm not sure where the majority of your projects are happening, but
Brockton, Attleboro, down and out, not
in
in Boston.
Massachusetts, though. Yeah.
Yeah, Boston
So,
or Massachusetts, and yep, exactly.
Because I interviewed somebody, an engineer from RDH Building Science, based in Boston there just a couple of weeks ago. And he said, he's consulting on a lot of high performance projects, mostly multifamily or institutional. And he said that at least 50% of the projects coming across his desk have some offsite component to them. And generally speaking, they're closed systems where it's not just the framing. Let's say it's not just if it's a wood construction or steel frame, but more than half of the projects he's seeing come through. So that may be a difference between really affordable housing like multifamily versus maybe some of the projects he's working on. But I did find that interesting. It really does. That blew me away.
Yeah, and I don't want to open a whole nother can here, but when we're talking about workforce and affordable, I'm in New Mexico. We're working in Colorado and the Western states a lot, and a lot of the cost of those critical housing developments, those budgets get blown on entitlement and fighting for land use changes and density. So I do think there's a lot that we're doing in terms of designing out the need for detailing every single project. And I think the repetition is critical. I don't know why we're redesigning every single habitat house across the country for each of those communities. Why can't we be changing them and updating them, but basically, doing great design once and utilizing it for thousands? But I think what gets lost in the process to actually get these affordable housing projects done, all those upfront soft costs are killing projects and really killing the budgets that we're not able to build them better, because so much is spent upfront fighting for the ability to build multifamily, at least in the West. You guys are on the East Coast where people are accustomed to density and understand planning and what that means for community building. That wasn't about any kind of, prefab at all, Ilka. I'm sorry.
No, actually, though, I think your point is a really good one. And one of my great regrets is that I had the opportunity when I was working at Katerra to witness some market studies, and I had absolutely no idea how large your market is. I had no idea that when people look at housing in the United States, which, by the way, the single family home and housing market so much dwarfs all the other markets that it wasn't even worth looking at. The East Coast doesn't rate. We don't have that much space, and we're not building that much. And the impact that you have the potential to make where you are is so much greater than we do here. I had no idea on the size or the numbers. I was completely ignorant. But when you look at the Southwest and the West and potentially even a little bit the Northwest, the numbers are staggering. The Southeast, the Northeast, not so much. It's just, the scale that you're working, the number of units is tremendous.
Yeah, thanks, Katie. I had no idea about that size of the market share there either. And what's interesting about this, though, what Edie, what you're saying is that it sounds like there still needs to be quite a bit of mindset that needs to change in terms of understanding the benefits of multifamily housing and energy efficiency in general. And I do think that's a thread that goes through even understanding prefabrication. It also goes back to changing people's mindset or thinking about what construction is a little bit, because the prefab approach is different. And as long as you don't accept that you have to learn the new ways, and maybe there is a little bit of growing pain in the beginning, but that needs to happen to really streamline the process. So what is the strategy though then? Like, how do we actually reach that tipping point where prefab is going to take over? Because the potential is there. So Beth, what is your thought on that?
I mean, I have two hunches, which are not the whole solution because it's such a complex problem. But we can look to the other countries where there's been a much bigger uptake, and let's look at Sweden again briefly. They went through a major motion in the government to unify their code and zoning, to have a major reform that would support offsite construction. And I think that really pushed that paved the path then for these companies. I guess the complement to that are these companies that are focused really on vertically integrating. And they have vertical integration all the way from the lumber company owning the forest, being the same as the trucking company that's delivering an offsite product. So they have this massive vertical integration. So that being said, great, that's Sweden. We have such a different system here, and we have this patchwork of zoning and regulation. It seems like we've been talking about working locally to help really define zones where this can take off and get a foothold, I think is really critical. So whether that's a pocket of, New Mexico or, here in New England, working to really unify the code and the zoning so that we can remove those barriers to it being able to really take off, I think is a huge piece of it.
If you look at the impact of just the adoption of the code, the stretch energy code for the groups, for the communities that have done it, already I can see a reverberant effect, because now developers who maybe didn't care that much about performance recognize that they are going to have a passive house consultant, and they're going to have to change the performance of the building. Unfortunately, sometimes this happens in CDs, which is a bit late for the moment, but that just happens to be the rules now. I think your point is spot on, that this becomes the combination of legislation and carrot and stick. So is it the Birdo, I forget what New York calls it. What is it? Amendment 94. What does New York City call it? But if you haven't hit certain performance targets, you are fined. If you combine that with the incentives when you're putting these projects together, and that they're actually funding or better yet, tax breaks or something that you can monetize, that moves the market very quickly. But I think that it is right that it is somehow the role of government's heavy hand to sort of shift the market, because I don't think this is going to happen on its own. We've talked about this before, that as motivated as people are to do this, to have high performance buildings, they are often more motivated by cost. So if we can align those two and find that there's actually financial gain to starting a company that produces something that meets a demand for a lower cost, higher performance project that has a residual benefit for that owner, that developer, it moves a lot more quickly when there's the heavy hand of government sort of either giving some funding or for some punitive legislation. So I agree with that.
I just love that you guys jumped into this, because I was going to ask the question about a national code, and I thought, oh, that's way too controversial. I love you guys jumped right into that. And I'm just going to sort of pile on to what you were just saying, Katie, that if those developers in that region or in that country all are required to build to that performance, that question of cost almost disappears, because that is what is standard and what everyone is trying to achieve for a better price, but that everyone is sort of on a fair playing field, where we're working with a lot of developers who are, are based in places where there's incentives, where there is at least 2021 code, if not, plus net zero. And they're developers who have, a mission-driven community to build better. And so they are creating a market for that specific, high performance home or townhome or community, but they're doing it in a place where they're almost forced to, they're just taking it one step further and going to passive. But I think this, it has been shown that the improvement in code does push the market. And, the 2021 code is getting really close to what we all believe everything should be built to, which is the right direction, which, to my point, and I have this conversation with a lot of, our friends and maybe competition in the industry, is why not just build past? And in part, it's because of those local code officials who want to see it hit their code. They don't want to see it hit past code. Where I feel like everyone in prefab should be building past code. That should be the answer, rather than trying to have the nuance to just that specific code. And heaven forbid we're backing up to 15 and 18, but that's true in a lot of communities. We at Be Public are not going to build, we're not going to dumb it down for that code. What we build is what we build, and that's what you can specify.
So
for a reason.
Yeah, and this actually really leads well into my final question, which is, so I guess we all agree that we do think that there is enormous potential in offsite manufacturing, and that we do think that it's the key to mainstreaming passive building construction. But what do we personally do in our practice to move that forward?
Oh, I think all of you are in a slightly better, I feel like you're already sort of there. I've been working with a group from NESE, the Northeast Sustainability Group, and I've learned some valuable lessons there, that if you want to be known for performance in your work, you have to lead with that. And that's what I think that we need to learn how to do, particularly at Westwork. I think HP Tech already, we came out of the gate, we're an R&D company. We don't make any money yet. We don't have a product. So, we just get to sort of stand there in the sort of limelight of goodness. But as a practicing architecture firm, we don't necessarily. And I think that it becomes a mandate for us to make those decisions and set some standards and say, we are a performance firm, and this is how we do our work, and this is how we think work should be done. And if that isn't your goal, then you should probably find another firm. And we haven't been doing that. I think about that all the time. I will say that because of the group that we service, it tends to be low-income housing. They have other mandates that they service that are laudable. So it is of our good fortune that the code and performance has forced them into a space where their projects not only have to serve this underserved public, but they actually have to perform really well. But I think that we struggle with trying to make that a given part of the process, that no building that we do doesn't meet a certain level of performance to the point that you just made, Edie. We need to have a standard. We say, look, no, we don't dumb it down for that. All of the buildings meet this passive house standard. That's just our baseline. And so I feel like that's a professional goal for us, that us at Westwork, that we are grappling with. But that is, I think, something that we hope to achieve.
Mm-hmm. And, I would answer Ilka's question by a couple fold. One, we've already spent some time talking about repeatable designs. So, finding ways to leverage repeatable designs. I've already heard of some of the big names in, production housing getting into offsite construction. So that's very hopeful to me. They're going to be spinning out better homes, much better than code. And now, building to Energy Star and sometimes DOE zero energy ready projects. So that we're going to be seeing that happen. But repeatable designs, I think, is pretty critical. And then I think the other piece, and this is where I'm working right now currently professionally, is in software solutions that can remove barriers to construction coordination. Because a lot of what we're talking about are the professional services costs of upfront coordination during pre-construction, right? And then when you're building in a factory, especially when you're doing a custom project, there is so much coordination that needs to happen. And, not to go down a rabbit hole around software types, but everybody's working in a different software. The architect's working in a BIM model, and you've got the structural engineer working in the CAD software, and then the offsite fabricator is working in a different CAD software that integrates with their production, their build needs with their machinery. And then we've got builders and all the inspectors were working from 2D PDFs. It's a nightmare out there in terms of software coordination. So I think from my perspective, one of the major ways that we can pull the lever to reduce costs is through better systems, better software management. And we certainly don't have the answer to that, but we're working on pieces of that puzzle at least.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah.
We didn't even talk about this, and this is in our next podcast, but that's so right, Ilka, the work that you're doing. The other reason that I think that prefab is more expensive than it needs to be is that in order for it to really work, I think it needs to be highly automated. And in order for it to be highly automated, we have to close the gap between the model that we create and the production model that is used for fabrication. And we at HP Tech wrestle with that all the time, that space, and we haven't ever been able to close that gap. But you all are doing that. You're doing that. Edie's doing that. I mean, Beth, you're doing that. I think that's so much more important to moving the needle.
Well, what's really interesting, and we're still struggling with that too, although that's what we do, right? So, and we, in the beginning, we did set out and say, okay, what do we do to make this all more automated, right? We thought there is going to be, because our third partner is a software developer. So we thought, okay, we'll just let David develop the software that does it all. But it turned out it really wasn't that, because there's too much knowledge, kind of passive house, because everything we do goes through the passive house lens. And it's really, there's a lot of human thinking behind it. It's not really that easy to just, put it through some kind of software. So what we really figured out by now, and I hope at some point there's going to be a software, but it's also hard to get everyone to use another thing, right? Everyone, I mean, as Beth, as you said, everyone does it differently. So for us, the key was really to figure out, how do we get everyone to talk to each other in a way that it's streamlined? So it's so much about communication. whether it's through software or visual communication or whatever that is. It's all about communication, and maybe that's what needs to be automated.
Yeah, I'm really impressed with you guys tackling the software. I was actually designing apps and platforms before I got into Be Public, and I have to say, just jumping out of technology and into job creation and building homes seems so much easier at this moment. Real materials rather than trying to noodle all of that nuance into streamlining, and it's so very crucial. We were in a meeting the other day, really talking about AI and where we are hopeful it's going to change our company. And everyone on my team agrees that they would like AI to do all estimating for them. So if you guys could work on that, the Be Public tech team would be very, very happy. And I'm going to jump in and just answer the question of, I think it was, what are we each doing right now? And I think, for us, we're really trying to pre-engineer and pre-design to simplify. We're all really focused on those passive house principles. And we're trying to sort of get ahead of any project and detailing so that it can be a little bit more streamlined. So that feels good, that like our choice to invest in all of that sort of for the industry and offer it widely has been really beautifully received. And I think because of that, we're talking to builders and communities and homeowners and architects who have almost no knowledge of passive house and certainly not training. But it's almost, we're finding it as like a gateway to get people into what we're all obsessed with, which is really gratifying. I mean, a lot of what we do is talk about this with folks and sort of spread the word and train and educate. But it really is, here's a simplified version to sort of lure people into thinking about building science and think about the long-term costs of maybe lazy air sealing on site, that pinprick really will have a long-term effect on the comfort of the people who are going to live in that building or on the energy they're going to have to pay for. And people are psyched to be empowered about any kind of change at this point. I think offering good news and empowering folks, not overwhelming. I think that's the thing about how we talk about it, is we really are offering sort of a simplified path into this world. But that people need some hope around this. And I think that's what's really kind of keeps me going in this work, is that, yes, all of us here at the Accelerator sort of love being a part of this community, but there are a lot of people who have not been invited in. And to see people get that first spark, we've all had it. We've all experienced it. And when we get out of sort of this insular community and start talking to other people, it has so much gravity and power. That's a lot of what we're doing, is trying to unsilo it and talk to people and share that there are things that they can do, small incremental changes to their practice to get them on this pathway.
So I think this is a really great way to put it. Prefab is a way to invite people into the passive house community.
Make a t-shirt.
Coming up. Awesome. Thanks, everyone. This was awesome as usual. And any last words?
So fun. I love being part of this and seeing, being inspired every day by my colleagues and what they're bringing to the table and all of you.
No, this is great. Thank you for the invitation. It was really fun to get together with y'all again. So I'm glad we got a chance to meet. We'll have to think of something else next time.
I think we tackled a lot. I think, we could talk about almost anything. You guys are awesome and really great to see you. And congrats on everything you're working on. Didn't get to see you guys in person at some of these conferences, but I'll see you online for some cool stuff coming up, and then hopefully some things soon.
Well, thank you very much, Ilka. That was quite the chat. Is that how you guys normally just catch up and solve the problems of the world?
Of course, every time we solve it, every time differently.
Well, I think you touched on some really important points there, and it was quite a good journey of what's working well in prefab, but also I really appreciated you guys looking at some of the challenges and sort of thinking about what are the hurdles that we need to get over to get to that other side of the mass adoption, the sort of promise of what prefab is often talked about, and really thinking about why we're not there yet. The issue of Sweden, or the example of Sweden, often comes up, and I think where you got to was some really interesting political differences. I was intrigued towards the end about the government's heavy hand, and I know that's a challenge in some places where people want to do their own thing, but sometimes there does need to be someone who's, particularly when there's something relying on a system of coordination and collaboration, sometimes that does need to be guided so that people are producing things that are at least compatible with each other. And I think that's part of the issue that you identified. It's all well and good having components, but if those components don't fit with each other, and if software doesn't communicate to each other, then you don't end up with a system that's completely scalable. Lots of really great stuff. What was did you have any sort of takeaways or summary points from that chat?
Yeah, I think for me, these conversations are always just so awesome because the four of us, look at things differently because we come from different angles, from different perspectives. And I think what it always shows is that there's not one way to solve it, that this is such a big endeavor with changing the industry a little bit. And that just can't happen from, in a really short amount of time, because a lot of things have to change and a lot of things have to be tackled. So I think my big takeaway is, as I said, we're all believers. We're all in it for the long term. We all created our businesses and careers around prefabrication. So we definitely all believe in that potential. But I think we do have to be patient. It's hard sometimes because we want to move things really, really quickly, and it's not as fast as we want it to be. And I think that's a lot of times the challenges that we talk about how do we move things quicker. But we also have to accept that it's big, and everything takes a little bit of time, and we do believe that we're going to get there, but that we need to work on it. And I think one thing too is that people have these expectations, right, of the prefab industry changing everything very quickly and solving everything, and just realizing that we're going to get there, but we're not quite there yet. And maybe the expectations don't align yet with what the possibilities are going to be. I think realizing that, and then just even in projects, being a little bit more patient, even if things don't go as fast or as cheap as promised. I think that's important to acknowledge.
Yeah. Zach, what about you?
Well, just piggybacking on that, kind of patience, and there's progress being made. We're not there yet. That whole thing. It reminds me of a quote that I just read from Katharine Hayhoe, she's one of my favorite climate scientists and communicators. She shared this on Earth Day, which just was a few days ago. That comparing the climate action problem and project and process as like climbing a mountain. And when you're climbing the mountain, the top of the mountain constantly it seems like it's so far away, am I there yet? Am I there yet? But if you stop and turn around and look down, and you really recognize the progress that is being made. So it's just a reminder, like, that this will take time, and we can at least know that we're making progress. I don't know where to start, and it was I don't want to, it was a very rich conversation. There were so many great anecdotes from folks and insights. I really, it's always fun to hear Katie and hear her stories from being at Katerra, that famous example of impatience in this space. But also just, can you imagine the kinds of brain power and money that was being thrown at the problem there? And just, so hearing about that from her is always so fun. And then another thing that I just one thing that's not stood out from Beth's comments were that idea that there is a price point where if you get a low enough price point that then people are willing to accept that they're not going to be able to customize something. And I think about that a lot just on our lot, single family house in Seattle, Washington. So, I definitely, the whole multifamily thing also really resonated. But what, we think about, could we have a high performance accessory dwelling unit on our property? I think that would be perfect, because then we could retire in there and we could rent the larger house to help fund our retirement and things. But they're so expensive. It's so crazy expensive to even think about that in terms of the cost per square foot. But absolutely, if there were a solution that was prefabricated, that was, reasonably, at a reasonable cost, I'd be very willing to accept a cookie cutter. I don't care. That's great. As long as the door is on the right side so we can get into it, we're good.
Yeah.
So anyway, just awesome, fantastic conversation.
Yeah, I really like that, using the clothing and fashion as an analogy instead of the often used cars, and that the quote there, the tailored clothing is not a human right, I think, is such a good way of thinking about bespoke housing, tying in what you were discussing there. The other thing I really liked, somebody said to build products, not projects, and that really that was a bit of a penny drop moment for me, because it made me realize that so much of the cost and complexity of housing is because we have project managers, because it is a project. That's a thing. Whereas you don't have projects for every single widget coming out of a factory. You have someone who designs the process, and then you just hit print. And I know it's not going to be that simple all the time in houses, because they are more complex. But we have ways of building complex things in a repeatable way. So I really think that's a good way of thinking about what it's going to take to shift from the project being developing the process, and the output of that, the individual units being products that are high quality products, but not projects in and of themselves. Well, great stuff. Well, I hope you have more conversations like that and keep figuring things out, Ilka. Maybe make sure you record the next one too. Zach, we've got some exciting things coming up. You mentioned at the top of the show a prefab event, which is this is all leading up to, but we've got some other regular events as well. So what's on the calendar?
Yeah, so this week on Wednesday, the Passive House Accelerator Live, we have a 101 series of the show, because it's the first Wednesday of the month. So we are going to be joined by Enrico Bonalari of EMU. He is the co-founder and CPO, Chief Passive Officer of EMU Passive, and he's going to be presenting the unusual suspects of building science, details that matter. And then, yes, on May 17th, we have the big Prefab conference coming up online, and so you can enjoy this from the comfort of your desk or your couch at home, if you like. And we'll be featuring pioneers in the prefab space and how folks like Edie and Ilka and over a dozen others are exploring using prefab to enable passive house levels of construction, and also to harness prefab for low embodied carbon construction, and the challenges around that, the opportunities around that. It's going to be super great and fun, and we'll have a bunch of prefab manufacturers as well at the trade show. It's going to be the same sort of production values and online experience that we had for Reimagine Buildings 24, the big 24-hour conference, but it will be a 3 hours of programming plus networking and trade show. So lots of opportunities to connect with peers and really fast-paced information sharing. So we're really looking forward to it. You can find information about it on the homepage at PassiveHouseAccelerator.com.
Great. Thank you very much for that, Zach. Thank you again, Ilka. Really appreciate. Great to have you on the show again. And we'll be back again next week on Passive House Podcast.